and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Noble Goza is a World War II veteran for sure, although by the time he was drafted in 1945, little did he know that the war was about to end. His 4th Marines Division had been sent to Maui as replacement troops for the 4th Marine survivors returning from Iwo Jima. While training for what everyone figured would be a ground war with Japan, well, the bomb was dropped, and soon after the war was over. He spent another year in Hawaii, soon was discharged, thinking that he would never ever see combat. Well, he was wrong. Fast forward to 1950, when then Marine Reserve Noble Goza was redeployed, this time the fast track to Korea. He was on an LST to the cliffs of Inchon, then later to North Korea, where his 7th Marines Division was on its way to the Chosin Reservoir when he was wounded, and his military service came to a quicker than expected end. His is a fascinating story of service in 2 wars, and we welcome Noble Goza to Veterans of the Valley. Noble, it's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to know you and to meet you. You and I got to go on the Lone Star Honor Flight to Washington, D.C. back in May, and that was a thrill. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. We'll have some pictures. But talk about, you were in high school, I guess, in Houston when you were drafted in 1945.
That's right. I only liked about 6 months of graduating, but Uncle Sam had other ideas, so away I went, and went through boot camp in Paris Island, and training at Camp Lejeune.
In North Carolina.
A railroad trip from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Wound up in Camp Pendleton, and from there on over to the 4th Marine Division, which had just returned from Iwo Jima. I was a replacement.
Right. And you were just a raw recruit. You were a jarhead.
That's right.
You were still a
jarhead.
Just a young Marine sort of from Houston, Texas, and all of a sudden you were thinking at the time when you went to Maui, you were training for really what everybody believed was going to be an unwanted and what would have certainly been a bloody ground war in Japan. Do you remember that time and thinking about where you might be headed and what you might be headed into?
Well, they said that we was going to be going to one of the larger islands in the Japanese group.
Right.
Which one we really never did know. But that's all right, we never went.
Right. Small armed ordnance.
Yes, but after the war was over, I didn't have enough time to come home, so
right.
I was redeployed to Marine Small Arms Ordnance Depot, 2.5 miles from downtown Honolulu.
Well, I guess if you got to serve, that's not a bad place to be.
That's not a bad place.
You eventually did come home.
I did come home.
And
yeah.
you were honorably discharged from the Marines, and I guess at the time you thought, well, your military service was over, so you came back to Houston, and you went to work for a while, right?
Yeah, that's right. I went to work, and at the time that I left, I had just started training as a bus driver.
Yeah.
For the Houston Transit.
Right.
Of course, that interrupted about the middle of my training, so when I came back, I started that all back over again, and for a couple of 3 years after, that was my employment at Houston Transit Company.
After you got back from Korea.
Yes,
but let's go
no,
back.
No, World War II.
Yeah, from World War II, right. But you were called up again in 1950
right.
when Korea, and that was pretty much of a fast track, wasn't it? Because
it was.
You had already had training in Hawaii, so when you went to Pendleton in California, you were pretty much just waiting there to get on an LST and go to Korea.
Well, we didn't wait long.
Didn't wait long.
Because they was forming the 7th Marine
right.
Regiment, and I was absorbed into that regiment, and we was on high seas in less than a week.
You said within 23 days you were...
Well, from 23 days from the time I left Houston, we was under machine gun fire in Korea. In Korea.
Talk about that experience of landing in Korea, the cliffs of Inchon. It's a very notable and famous part of the Korean conflict.
Well, it's a very unusual place to make a landing.
Right.
The tide goes out and you have about 2 or 3 miles of mud flat. So it has to be timed at the exact time to get up to the wall.
Right.
But MacArthur had it all figured out to a fine detail. And he supervised the timing and everything, and we made the landing at Inchon, went on up through Kempo Airfield, and then through Sewell and on up towards the 38th parallel.
I want to go back to climbing the wall because I've heard so many stories about that. And I realize it's been a long time. It's been 60 years. But what do you remember about that? Had you had training where you were climbing like rope ladders, I guess?
Well, it was rope ladders. We had some stationary ladders, but mostly rope ladders. And we was real well accustomed to that because that's where we went over the sides of these ships
Right.
into the landing craft. So
Right.
that really wasn't anything new. We were just going up instead of down.
And you were going up without realizing what you were going to find when you got
That's right,
to the top.
but
what type of
actually
resistance
at
you
the
might.
time that our regiment went ashore, there was relatively small opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And we wasn't really in the first wave. They didn't really encounter all that much opposition,
Right.
and we was more fortunate we encountered less.
So you went into the country a certain distance, and then you turned things over to the Army, and then you came back out, and you got back on what type of vessel? That took
LST.
you back on an LST, went around the south tip of Korea, I
That's right,
guess,
yeah.
and upwards to
And
North
we
Korea.
waited
right?
offshore because the North Koreans had mined the offshore waters there where they thought we might make a landing, and it took them several days to clear the mines so that we could go on in, to shore.
Right. Now, how'd you go into shore when you came back on North Korea? Was that just a regular shore landing?
Yes.
That was just a shore landing.
Well, we really didn't know what we was going to run into.
Right.
We was ready for anything, but it turned out there was a relatively small opposition there.
You were a foot soldier, headed to the Chosin Reservoir, Able Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division, and you were in the 2nd Platoon. We're going to see some photographs here in a moment. As a matter of fact, let's go to the photographs right now because before we go on, I want to see some of the photographs here. Here's the first one. About how old were you in this picture, do you think?
I think I was 19.
You look about 19, like you don't know what you're about to get into. There you go. But a good-looking Marine. Now this was in Hawaii, right?
Yes, this was at Camp Catlin, the ordnance depot. They, as the units would break up around the Pacific, they would send their small arms back to our depot, and we would check them, refurnish them, put them in Cosmoline, and then go off to different places after that. Yeah.
And this particular day, you had forklift duty,
That's right.
obviously. This was during part of your training in August of 1945.
This was with the 4th Marine Division on Maui.
On Maui, right.
That's before I was with the division about 8 months
Right,
before they broke up and all came home.
right.
And I went to Honolulu and they went home.
What do you think you were shooting at there?
Well, it
A
was
tree or
probably no live ammunition. It was
just training?
maybe a photo op,
Yeah, let's find a good-looking Marine and take a picture of him. Okay, this is the most remarkable photograph that you have. And if you can't read at the bottom, I'm going to read that. Marines moved north towards the Yala, and into the Chosin Reservoir area. First contact and action against the Chinese Army took place at Sudong. And then there's more on that. This is the 2nd Platoon. And as you can see, you're identified there in this photograph. And Lieutenant Bradley is to the right. You say you remember this photograph being taken. You can remember
Yes,
this. Talk about where you are, what you're doing there, and sort of this photograph.
Well, we had just broke camp that morning, and I think this was about 7:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the whole company was moving out, and that's me. You can see my Goza nose there. And Lieutenant Bradley, he was going to put his sea bag in the Jeep. Of course, he rode most of the way, and we walked.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 cameras there, one a still camera, the other a fellow with an 8mm, and I remember exactly
You said
that particular time.
You said you remember the photographer saying, "Watch the birdie,"
Yes,
and then you said something back to him that we can't repeat right
that's
now.
right.
But yeah, you know, you can sort of tell, although the picture is a little bit fuzzy, you can sort of tell that you were watching the birdie. It looked like you're kind of smiling at the photographer there.
Mm-hmm. And little did I know that 3 days after that picture was taken, I would be wounded in action on Hill 352.
Now, if I'm right, if I told you right, you really just came across this picture about 8 years ago, right?
Yes.
When you happened to
That's right.
see Lieutenant Bradley, or he called you.
He called me.
He's
on the
passed
phone.
away now, but about 8 years ago, he called you and said, "Hey, I've got a picture that you're in."
Yeah. Well, the Chosin Few, the fraternal organization that we belong to, has a website,
Right.
thechosenfew.com, and from time to time they put new pictures on that website, and I think it was about 9 o'clock one night. The phone rang, and it was I call him Lieutenant Bradley. He stayed in. He retired a major. But Lieutenant Bradley called me and said, "Goza, get your computer up and going." Said, "I see your picture." And so that's when I realized that my picture was on the web.
This was November of 1950. Y'all are pretty bundled up there. Was it terribly cold, or
Well,
just cold
no,
enough to be?
it hadn't really got into the sub-zero weather then.
Right, right.
But
Still pretty cold, cold
still
enough to where
pretty
you
cold.
all
Oh,
are,
yeah.
y'all are bundled up there. And so that's the 2nd platoon, and you're on your way. This is literally a picture of you becoming a member of the Chosin Few, right there, because you're on your way to the Chosin Valley. A remarkable, remarkable photograph. It really is. Let's move on. Next picture, I think, is coming up. There we go. Now this, tell us about this picture, because this is your dad.
Well,
And tell him-
this has nothing to do with,
With your-
1950 Marine Corps.
No, this is 1920.
This is 1922.
It's such a
My,
great
my
picture.
father was a barber.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
And that's him first chair on the right, right?
This, in the first chair on the right, is my father.
Mm-hmm.
Standing behind a man, I assume he just give a haircut to you.
Right.
And his shop was in the lobby of the Taylor Hotel in Taylor, Texas.
In downtown
And I
Taylor.
haven't been there in years, but I understand that the old hotel is still standing. I'll have to check into it. But that was true to its area, the wood stove and everything, you know.
Well, like I said, this has nothing to do with your service. It has nothing to do with you. You weren't even born yet. But I just thought it was such a great, clear picture from the 1920s of your dad, the barber. You must have been very proud of him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on. Now, obviously, we fast forward quite a bit. One of the, at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Raymond G. Davis became General Davis. He was a member of your platoon, and later on in San Antonio, you had a reunion with him. Talk about Raymond Davis. He's a Medal of Honor winner.
General Davis was regimental commander of the 7th Marine in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
A smaller man in stature, but he could do anything. And he wound up getting the Medal of Honor, and he saved about half of our company from complete annihilation. And of course, the Chosin Few, we had our reunions, and this was taken at one of the reunions in San Antonio.
Right.
And that's me and my daughter, Crystal,
Uh-huh.
and General Davis there.
Great reunion and a great picture. We're gonna talk about another fellow Marine also in a moment. But let's go back now to Korea. The photograph that we saw, oh wait, I'm sorry, we've got more pictures. I apologize. We talked about that you were on the Lone Star Honor Flight with us back on May the 1st, or back in May. And this is a picture of you on board the airplane with your guardian. And we had a great time. We did a couple of shows on the Lone Star Honor Flight, and that's where I got a chance to meet you, was on the Honor Flight. And there you are on the plane. We're headed to Washington, D.C. And the next picture, I believe, yeah, there you are in front of the World War II Memorial. Boy, it was hot that day, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
I mean, that was early May, and it was in the mid-90s, I believe, that day. It was a hot day at the World War II Memorial. And then, of course, there you are, former Marine, in front of, I guess a lot of people call that the Iwo Jima Memorial, where its proper name is the United States Marines War Memorial. And, of course, the flag raising depicted at the top of Mount Suribachi at Iwo Jima. But anyway, some great pictures there. Now, I want to go back to that photograph that we saw of the platoon marching towards the Chosin Reservoir, and talk about what happened 3 days after that photograph was taken on November the 4th.
Well, at that particular day, I think it must have been around 9 or 10 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
We had orders to secure Hill 352.
Right.
It kind of commanded the supply route there, and they wanted to be sure that everything, there was no enemy at all on that. But then all of a sudden we started getting fire.
Mm-hmm.
Terrific fire. And we got pinned down for a while. One of our BAR men got in a position, and I think there was 3 machine gun nests, enemy machine gun nests ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
And he wiped out one, but there was 2 left. That we was in grave danger.
Yes, sir.
They really had us pinned down. And so First Platoon Sergeant Pointer,
James Pointer.
Mm-hmm. He saw the seriousness of the situation. He grabbed an automatic weapon and charged him with complete disregard to his safety.
Mm-hmm.
He picked up several grenades from wounded Marines as he went. He obliterated the 2 machine gun nests, but he was mortally wounded in that attack. And for that, he received the Medal of Honor.
Right.
And I had the honor myself of help carrying his body back to the aid station.
Indeed, remarkable story, and I want to mention that there is a website, and it is www.chosinfew, is that what?
Chosin Reservoir.
ChosinReservoir.com, excuse me, ChosinReservoir.com, that gives the complete history of the Chosin Few. There's a digest that comes out a few times a year called the Chosin Few, and the article you gave me describes the battle that you just described so well. And but then after that firefight, later on that evening, mm-hmm. coming back down, mm-hmm. is when you were wounded.
Yes.
Talk about how you were wounded.
Well, we secured the hill.
Mm-hmm.
We came down to the road, and very deep valley. The bottom of the valley was a river, a road, and then steep sides on either side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had moved on up, and It was dusky dark.
Right.
And we came to a place, and I think about 200 yards ahead was a sharp right-hand curve. We couldn't see around it. Lieutenant Bradley said, "I want 2 volunteers, Goza, you and somebody else." We immediately was volunteered. So we went on up, and immediately when we rounded the curve, we came under automatic weapon fire. I was hit in the leg along with another buddy of mine alongside of me. It was a ricochet, and we had humongous rocks all around us.
Right.
They dragged me and the other boy around to behind the rocks, and by that time it was just whining off the far side. But it became dark, and pretty soon here came a Jeep and got us back. It took them 4 days to get the wounded back to where we had made the landing at Hung Nam. We went on board the hospital ship Hope, and that's where I operated on. They got the fragment out, and I went on back to Japan.
Before that, you were just at a first aid station, where you
Yes,
said that the Red Cross pretty much was an aiming point for the
Well,
Chinese.
yeah, we
right?
had what they call the cracker box ambulances, and the Red Cross emblem was just an aiming point for the North Koreans and the Chinese.
Right, right. But your wounds were severe enough to where you could not continue in battle, and eventually you were sent back home.
Yes.
You were sent back home, and that was the end of your combat career, and you were eventually discharged for the second time from the U.S. Marines. We've got a few minutes left, and I want you to talk about sort of your post-military career. Talk a little bit about that. You said that you did a little bit of everything. You were a machinist.
That's right, but let's go back
made
to
stuff.
when I was discharged the last time.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, when I was in the hospital at Japan, Lieutenant come around and said, "Goza, you got the Purple Heart, but we run out."
That's right,
There
and
was
I was going to get to that. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead. You tell
now?
the story.
Okay. So he said, "Go ahead. We're going to get you back to the States, and when you get discharged, well, I'm sure they'll have Purple Heart there." Back to Treasure Island, discharged. Sergeant said, "Goza, we're out of Purple Hearts. So many got them, we just run out."
Still no Purple Heart.
And he said, "If you can wait 4 or 5 days, we'll have them."
Right.
I said, "In 4 or 5 days, I can be eating Mama's apple pie." So I went on home, and that's the way it was left,
With no Purple Heart.
with no Purple Heart.
However,
Yeah.
we fast forward quite a bit to just a few years ago, not that many years ago, I should say, and a ceremony at a local elementary school.
No, A&M history class.
A&M history class, that's right. Talk about that, because it was covered by local television, and talk about what happened that day.
Well, for some reason, unknown reason to me, somebody discovered that I never received a Purple Heart.
Right.
And so Dr. Arnold Kramer, history professor at A&M, whenever his class gets to the point where he's on the Korean part, he turns a complete class over to the members of the chosen few,
Right.
to enlighten them on the and the real history of the Korean conflict.
Right.
So when that was over, they said, "Goza, come up." And at that time, I discovered what a Marine Corps major was doing there.
This is a complete surprise to you, right?
A complete surprise.
Right.
Yeah, so 43 years after the fact, I received a Purple Heart.
You did. You did. You received your Purple Heart. It was a total surprise, and And I got to see your Purple Heart the other day, and indeed it looks newer than most Purple Hearts that were awarded to World War II veterans. I will say that because it is newer. Personally, after you returned from World War II, before you went to Korea, I believe you were married at that time, and have 2 children from that marriage, I believe. And your first wife died in 1978, and you were remarried, and a very wonderful thing happened to you when you were 61 years old.
Well, I remarried after 2 years. I said, this is not for me. And I remarried a younger lady, much younger than I. And I think we'd been married about 4 years. And when I was 62,
62.
we had a little girl.
How about that? And she's 24 years
She's
old now?
24 years old right now. She's a LVN nurse at the Brazos Valley Women's Clinic.
Went to Blinn?
Went to Blinn and
First she wanted to be a musician, and then she decided she wanted to be a nurse, right? And she went to Blinn, and she's working here right now, and she's 24 years old. So, yeah, you were 80 years old, I guess, when she graduated from high school, I guess, just about, right?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on that. Talk a little bit about, though, your career. You're a machinist. You make stuff. You had a long career with a lot of companies, but the UT Medical School was really your last job there where you worked.
Yes, that's right. When the financial bottom fell out of the oil industry in the early 80s, there was no job for machinists.
Right.
So I see this ad in the Chronicle, wanted manager for instrument machine shop, University of Texas Medical School.
And that's where you went. I wish we could talk more about it, but we are out of time. But we've talked about your military career and a great one it was, and thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Noble.
All right.
Brief service in World War II, a Purple Heart earned in Korea, a remarkable post-military career, and a new dad at age 61. And at only 85 years old, you get the idea that Noble Goza's life still has stories to tell. We salute him for his service as a United States Marine. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.